You are listening to the global network of podcasters dedicated to the pharmacy profession. Welcome to the Pharmacy Podcast Network.
You're listening to the NASP podcast. This specialty pharmacy podcast is a collaboration with the National Association of Specialty Pharmacy and the Pharmacy Podcast Network. The mission of the National Association of Specialty Pharmacy is to improve specialty pharmacy practice by promoting continuing professional education and certification of specialty pharmacists while advocating for public policies that ensure patient access to specialty medications. As the healthcare industry's leading podcast dedicated to the pharmacy profession, the Pharmacy Podcast Network is proud to bring our listeners the NASP podcast, in collaboration with the National Association of Specialty Pharmacy.
Hello, my name is Sheila Arquette, and I am the President and CEO of the National Association of Specialty Pharmacy. I am delighted to welcome my very special guests, Jeff Baird and Brad Howard, to this episode of the NASP podcast. Jeffrey S. Baird is chairman of the healthcare group at Brown & Fortunato, a law firm with a national healthcare practice based in Texas. He represents pharmacies, infusion companies, HME companies, manufacturers, and other healthcare providers throughout the United States. Mr. Baird is board certified in health law by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization and can be reached at area code 806-345-6320 or jbaird@bf-law.com. Bradley W. Howard is a litigator with an emphasis in health and employment law, and he is a shareholder and director at Brown & Fortunato. Brad received his BA from Texas Tech University in 1988, graduating summa cum laude. After college, Brad continued his education at the University of Texas School of Law. He received his JD in 1991 and is admitted to practice law in Texas, New Mexico, Iowa, Colorado, and Oklahoma. Brad handles governmental investigations, business disputes, and litigation involving healthcare providers, including DME companies, home health agencies, pharmacies, and hospitals. Brad is board certified in labor and employment law by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization. He is active in many trade associations, including the American Health Lawyers Association, the New Mexico Health Law Section Board of Directors, the Society for Human Resource Management, the Amarillo Area Bar Association, and the Panhandle Human Resources Association. Brad can be reached at area code 806-345-6310 or via email at bhoward@bf-law.com. Jeff and Brad, thanks so much for joining me today.
Hey, Sheila, we're glad to be here. It's, Brown Fortunato has had a long-standing relationship with NASP. It is a great organization. It's kind of the best of the best. You are an excellent executive director, and the services that NASP provides to the specialty pharmacy profession is just unmatched. And so, anytime that we here at Brown Fortunato can help you and help your team with education, we'll step up and do it. Brad, your thoughts?
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here, Sheila. Thanks a lot for inviting us. We love doing these podcasts because you get a chance to convey a lot of information to your members, but in a very casual, kind of relaxed way, which we love to do it like that. So thanks for having us today.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for all your support. Like Jeff, like you said, you and I have been connected and working together for quite some time. And I mean, you've just been instrumental in, what the legal committee has done and delivered for members, our specialty pharmacy law conference, all of it. So I can't thank both you and Brad enough for everything that you've done for us.
Well, thank you. We're glad to do it.
All right, so let's talk corporate compliance. So what is a corporate compliance program and how does it help a pharmacy to avoid and fix mistakes?
Yeah, a compliance program is something that's fairly unique to healthcare, and that's because healthcare providers, be it pharmacies, hospitals, physician groups, have to comply with a whole bunch of federal and state laws, particularly fraud and abuse laws, and that's because we as pharmacies, we receive, or the payment sources we get are from taxpayer money and from insurance companies and what have you. And so there are laws in place to protect taxpayer money and money coming in from insurance companies. And so a compliance program is kind of I'll put it this way. Any corporation has a set of bylaws, and it governs how the corporations run. Or a limited liability company has what's called an operating agreement, and that governs how decisions are made for the limited liability company or LLC. Well, a compliance plan is a written document. It's not particularly rocket science, but it's kind of a detailed document that lays out what the laws are that pharmacies need to follow, how the pharmacy is to comply with those laws, what steps it needs to take, the compliance program, which is a multi-page document that needs to be amended on a regular basis, modified and updated. Talks about how to spot problems. And then lastly, and equally as important, is when problems arise, which they will. Every pharmacy, every law firm, every company is going to have problems. And when they arise, how to resolve the problems. Probably, Sheila and Brad, one of the most important components of a compliance program is the appointment of a compliance officer. For a big specialty pharmacy, this can be a full-time gig. For a smaller pharmacy, the compliance officer can wear a couple of different hats. But the important, and virtually all the vast majority of compliance officers are not attorneys. They're just really smart, competent people who are focusing on the laws and policies that a pharmacy must follow so as to not get in trouble with government enforcement agencies. And the biggest, I think the most important feature of a good compliance officer is for he or she to be the proverbial, quote, canary in the mine shaft, close quote. The compliance officer doesn't have to be an expert on what the laws are, because normally he or she's not going to be an attorney, but he or she needs to know enough to to have the kind of a Pavlovian reaction when kind of a nervous twitch when the pharmacy is about to do something that makes the compliance officer feel uncomfortable. That's when the compliance officer steps up and says, okay, let's do a timeout and call our healthcare attorney. Let's make sure that what we're doing is not going to get us into trouble. So that's what a compliance program is. Brad, your thoughts? If I've gone off the rails, bring me back on.
No, that's right. That's right on. I find, Sheila and Jeff, that in a lot of the investigations, the healthcare and pharmacy investigations I handle where the government has reached out with a subpoena or maybe a civil investigative demand, or they just show up and they want to know about certain business practices of the pharmacy. A lot of times those complaints were provided to the government by an employee or former employee who did not, I'm not saying always, but in a lot of cases, did not feel comfortable to raise that concern directly to the pharmacy to address it. And that's one of the best aspects of a corporate compliance program is it encourages employees, if you have concerns about the way we're doing something or questions about some of our practices, raise them with the compliance officer, raise them with the company, give us a chance to talk to you about that and get you comfortable with what we're doing. Because in the cases where that isn't present, the only other recourse is for the employee to go to the government and whistleblow, and that happens far too often when it could be avoided.
All right, so a PBM sends a letter to a specialty pharmacy that includes assertions that the pharmacy is engaged in activities that violate the contract between the PBM and the pharmacy. So let's look at two scenarios. The first, the pharmacy knows that the PBM's assertions are wrong. How should the pharmacy respond? And then the second scenario, the pharmacy knows that the PBM's assertions are correct. How should they respond?
Yeah, I'll take lead on that one if it's all right, Jeff.
Sure, you bet.
So let's start with the first scenario. And these are both these are both very common scenarios. And I mean, these are all very real world questions, because a lot of our pharmacy clients do receive letters from PBMs, and in many cases the allegations are unfounded. So in that first scenario, let's say the PBM is wrong. First thing I would do is I would get your lawyer involved to at least review a draft before you respond, because a lot of times when someone's upset about an accusation that isn't true, you react rather than respond. It might have a little bit too much emotion. It might involve a phone call to the PBM, or somebody saying, "Hey, that's a bunch of crap. I mean, we didn't do that. We don't do those." Well, it isn't going to go well if the pharmacy reacts. So we always recommend get your lawyer involved at the beginning and have them work with you on this, but to respond rather than react. Usually in writing is what we tell clients to do. It's got to be a very professional response in the sense that you want to take the emotion, the anger, the mistreatment. You want to take that part out of it and keep it very professional. I like pharmacies to respond to those with a lot of facts, and set the record straight unequivocally. So we're not engaged in that practice that you're talking about, and explain the reasons why. But don't stop there. I think it's a good opportunity to take that bad situation and turn it around to something more positive. So you want to provide them information about your pharmacy, educate them about your pharmacy's background, its focus on patient care, its good practices, your commitment to compliance. If it's helpful, maybe the history of the pharmacy, but tell the PBM all about who you are, why the relationship with that PBM is very valuable to its members, to the patients that the pharmacy serves. And then you're ending strong. You're rebutting the concerns, but not in a real negative way. You're making it a positive thing to get off their list. Their bad.
Yeah, and Brad, let me kind of jump in. It's we have to understand that at the end of the day, the PBM is in a superior bargaining position. Lawyers like to use the term that possession is 9/10 of the law. Well, the PBM possesses our money. And so whether it is right or wrong, in some ways, it doesn't matter. It possesses our money. And so there's a problem that needs to be solved. We don't need to win the battle or win the war. We need to solve the problem so we can go on and live another day. And so, as Brad said, as a pharmacy, we don't have the luxury of being righteously indignant. Rather, our approach is to solve the problem. The other thing, Brad, in fact, I'll let you know more about this than I do. When I know it's kind of self-serving to say bring your healthcare lawyer in, but you need to.
Right.
But the actual response back to the PBM, should that come from the lawyer, Brad, or should that come from the pharmacy?
Yeah, no, usually from the pharmacy directly. When I want to be involved in one of those, it might just be kind of quality control or a final review, final edits to the draft letter. I like the response to come back from the pharmacy on its letterhead or through its email, because you want the file to reflect PBM raised a concern of pharmacy and pharmacy responded. And then my work or any lawyer's work for the pharmacy, and at least in my opinion, should usually be behind the scenes.
Yeah, the PBM doesn't, at this juncture, unless things just really go south, PBM doesn't want to hear from attorneys. The PBM wants to hear from the pharmacy. And so, again, the approach is win-win. Let's solve the problem. You PBM may not have all the information. So we're now helping you out, and we're going to work on this together.
Yeah, and the reason I like to put some time into that, Sheila, some effort into it, besides just making the call, saying these things aren't true, or a quick cursory letter, the reason I like to invest some time and effort into the response is it may be that the PBM got some bad information. So take the opportunity to paint yourself in a really good light to the PBM while you're making the problem that Jeff referred to, go away. But by contrast, the approach is a little bit different. Let's say this never really happens to anybody that we all know, but let's say that the PBM's correct. Let's say they send a letter saying your pharmacy's violated these particular parts of our provider manual, of the contract, of our relationship, of what you're allowed to do. You've run afoul of all that, and they give one or more examples of how the pharmacy is not in compliance.
And Brad, this of course does happen.
It happens all.
Way too many
happens,
times.
It happens all the time.
Yeah.
It happens
Okay.
all the time. And even to really, really, really good pharmacies, because anybody can, anybody at some point can make a mistake or lose their footing or trip up or something. And so we see these letters a lot where the PBM's raising a concern. So the question is, well, how do we respond to that? And again, my advice is to respond. After doing some work, be sure that you put some effort into this letter, and you want to respond with, it's always, I mean, obviously it's always got to be truthful. You don't ever want to make any misrepresentation about your pharmacy when you're responding. So you want to be truthful at all times. Typically what we'll do is advise the pharmacy, it's case by case, but to acknowledge the issue, but put it in the right kind of light. Okay. Put it in the right context, because it might be there was a one-time only mistake. It might be it was very limited in scope. It might be that the provider manual changed at the end of 24, and we didn't realize that in 25 the rule had changed, and we fouled it up a little bit, but we're going to fix it. So you may consider acknowledging the error, but then you got to in the same paragraph, in the same sentence, in fact, you got to put it in context to explain it, to explain why that happened, and then what you've done to fix it. So, sometimes a pharmacist will say, hey, maybe I shouldn't respond. And I don't ever, Jeff and I don't ever advise that. We think you do want to respond, but then it's going to be case by case. You may want to, in this response, once you've explained it, I'm not saying give excuses, because, we're all parents and nobody wants an excuse. So don't give excuses, but explain. And that's where the lawyer's eyes, a second set of eyes on your response, are helpful to be sure that it doesn't come across as defensive or like you're trying to skirt, accountability or responsibility. But you want to put it in some context where, it isn't such a big deal. Maybe it's not as big a deal as the PBM is saying. If it is a big deal, you might consider offering, a corrective action plan, outline that in your response. Or if you're going to seek some exception to a rule, because maybe your pharmacy is different than most other network pharmacies, then explain why you would like to seek a little variance or exception to the rule. But the main thing here that at least I would like to counsel all pharmacies is put some time into the letter. Be sure it's very well stated, very convincing, very helpful, but respond quickly. If the letter comes in on a Friday, I like to have a good response back to the PBM if it's possible, early the following week. Even if they give us 7 days, I might take 4 or 5 days. I don't like to wait to the last minute to prove that, we're listening to them.
Yeah, the key is, the pharmacy wants to avoid the risk of being terminated, because every contract gives the PBM the right to terminate the pharmacy with or without cause. And so we want to, even if we as a pharmacy have made some mistakes, and that's okay, we all make mistakes, but we explain the mistakes, we give the context, we explain how we are being proactive in fixing the mistakes so that we don't give the PBM any kind of thoughts or ammunition about terming us.
Yeah. And one thing I might add, Sheila, if you don't mind, it's not quite your question, but it's real close, because I see a lot of these recently, is where maybe a drug wholesaler sends a letter to a pharmacy that says you've been engaged in these practices and you're outside the bounds of our contract, or you're dispensing too many controls or something like that. Maybe it's not a PBM, but it's another industry partner, in this case, a wholesaler. We've had a lot of examples where we write the letter back and put it all in the context of what the pharmacy was doing and why it really isn't what it looks like to the wholesaler. Just the other day, I got a letter back that said, thank you for your detailed letter explaining your business practices and responding to our concerns. We consider this matter closed. So the letters are very worthwhile.
So speaking about termination, so let's say a PBM sends a letter to a specialty pharmacy informing them that the PBM contract is going to be terminated and within 30 days. How should the pharmacy respond?
Yeah. So first thing I would do, because, we all know this, but if you get termed from one PBM, there may be obligations to report that to others. It depends what your PSAO agreements and what your provider agreements say, but there are certainly some cases where you've got to report that to others, and then they may want to do the same thing. So certainly it's always better to avoid termination for lots of reasons. And there are ways to do that. We've helped pharmacies reverse, a lot of termination decisions. And the game plan is usually something like this. The first thing we do is we look at the contract provider manual, maybe the PSAO agreement, maybe all of them, to confirm whether the PBM is within its rights to terminate. Although, like Jeff said a minute ago, a lot of these pharmacies serve under these agreements where you can be terminated without cause or with cause, and without cause doesn't require more than maybe 60 days notice, something like that. So it's important to look to make sure the PBM is correct. If they're not, then very professionally in your response letter to point that out. It's important to look at the provider manual or all the applicable agreements to see how you can appeal that, because we've been able successfully to appeal a lot of termination decisions by providing a lot of information to the PBM that what they think they know isn't as bad as they think it is by any means.
Yeah, and let me interject for a second,
Yeah.
Brad. The whole information thing is important because the PBM usually knows a whole lot less than what we think it does. And we've seen, Brad and I have seen this not only with PBMs, but we handle many criminal and civil investigations brought by the U.S. Department of Justice and against all different types of healthcare providers. And so often, whether it's the PBM we're talking about here or the Department of Justice over in another context, they have limited information. And so they're making decisions based on spotty information and and this is human nature. We do this. All of us do this. We fill in the gaps with our imagination. And so a PBM may be making, might be saying, okay, we're going to term you because we think you've done some bad stuff. Well, maybe we did some bad stuff, but probably we didn't. What we did do is probably not nearly as bad as a PBM thinks. And so our job then is to fill in those gaps where we want to make sure that the PBM is not basing its decisions on imagination, but it has all of the facts in hand. And, we've had, we can't guarantee 100% success, obviously, but we've done a pretty good job over the years where we have some good facts. We can move the needle, and the PBM will then back off the termination.
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. An example that Jeff and I see a lot of is, a pharmacy goes through an inventory audit. So they've got to prove they had enough inventory to fill, X number of scripts over a certain amount of time or whatever, because the PBM's got some bad information or they did the math the wrong way, or maybe certain wholesalers didn't respond to their requests. So you get terminated because you were fraudulent, because you didn't have enough product to support all the prescriptions that you filled. And, in most cases, that just isn't accurate. It's wrong, but something fell through the cracks. Maybe one of the larger wholesalers failed to respond to the inventory audit, to the request by the PBM. Maybe the pharmacy itself failed to provide all the records, or maybe the pharmacy didn't explain, hey, some of this inventory came from our 3 sister pharmacies across the country. When we had a shortage, we leaned on them for product, but the only records we have are these, and we didn't provide these to the PBM. So to Jeff's point, you want to put all that in the response or the appeal, whatever it ends up looking like, to the PBM, to put it all in context. And if some of it's accurate, then explain it. If none of it's accurate, then certainly rebut it. But in any event, you got to figure out what your rights are. You got to jump on that right away. And don't assume you're going to get an extension. A lot of times we'll get involved by pharmacies maybe on a Friday when a response is due the next week. And we can usually get an extension, but not always. So it's important to jump on that right away. In the very unlikely event that you're going to be terminated and there's not a lot you can do about it, at a minimum, I feel like it's important for the pharmacy to get the last word in the file, which might involve responding to everything, even if you think it isn't going to maybe reverse the decision. So at least you have the last word explaining, we didn't do these things you're talking about. This is what we did, and this is all, appropriate. It's important to get that, because if the PBM decides they want to send this file over to the government just to take a look, and you've got a long letter explaining that we didn't do these things and we shouldn't be terminated, that can be very helpful to convince the government to not look at it.
All right, so let's talk now about potential domino effect. So assuming a pharmacy is licensed in multiple states, as a lot of our specialty pharmacy are, what if a board of pharmacy in one state brings an enforcement action against the pharmacy? Might this result in other boards of pharmacy in other states bringing a similar type action?
Absolutely. And we call that the domino effect. It's the merry-go-round. When you get on it, you can't get off. When a pharmacy, and most of our specialty pharmacy clients, like you said, Sheila, are licensed in multiple states, many of them all around the country in all 50 states. And so, you're going to get disciplined at some point in time in some state where you do business for something. I mean, it's just inevitable for anybody doing business all over the country, if only because maybe a rule changed or a law changed and the pharmacy wasn't aware, or there was an employee error or something like that, innocent enough, but it does result in discipline in a state. The first thing we like to advise clients to do is, in the state where you've got the problem, obviously address it very proactively. And at the end of the day, try to get a resolution with that state that would not qualify as discipline. Maybe an educational effort is required. Maybe you have to pay a certain fee, but maybe it's something that isn't even discipline, so it isn't necessarily reportable to all your other states. But let's say that it is. Let's say it is discipline. The best you can get is $1,000 fine and a slap on the wrist, and you've got to report that to your other states. The advice we give pharmacies is have somebody on the team, and a lot of those you'll want to touch base with your counsel just to be sure you're dotting your I's and crossing your T's around the country. But be sure you report that in a timely manner to all the states where you do business, but also with an explanation. And the idea there is that you don't want all the states down the line where you do business, the other 49, to necessarily implement or, put into place some kind of discipline. We call it sister state discipline, but you want to avoid that result as much as you can. So the first thing is be sure you report discipline timely to your other states, but then it's important to put it in context of what actually happened. An example I worked on kind of recently was where a pharmacy around the country, a specialty pharmacy doing business everywhere, ran afoul of a rule in Florida. It's a very unique rule to Florida. It wasn't consequential to patient health or anything else. It was frankly kind of a technical violation, but in the end, the pharmacy had to pay some penalty to Florida. But when we advised the client how to report that to all the other states, we weren't beating up on Florida. We just put it in the context of it's a very specific rule in Florida. Here's what it was. Here's how we had to pay the $1,000 fine. Here's why it shouldn't matter to you. And then they reported that to all their other states, and the dominoes didn't fall because the other states were satisfied. Oh, that was a very specific Florida issue, nothing that we need to get our own pound of flesh or discipline on. So the best advice there, I think, is for multi-state specialty pharmacies, the minute you do get something that looks like discipline, check what the reporting requirements are in all your states. Some have less. One state might say, hey, in 5 days, you've got to report it. Other states may say within 30 days. So what you might want to do is to report it to all your states within 5 days so you don't take any chances on missing a state, which if you do miss a state, say Illinois, for example, then Illinois might say, okay, we're going to start a disciplinary action against the pharmacy because they failed to report this Florida discipline to us, which is a violation of Illinois law. Then you got a whole new, set of dominoes falling down there. So it is important. It's a great question. It's really important for the pharmacies to assess what they've got to do to report it and then to take care of that in a timely manner.
All right. So now let's talk about FTC walks into a pharmacy, right? Sounds like the beginning of a bad joke. But the FTC walks into a pharmacy unannounced and says that it's conducting an inspection. How does the pharmacy react to that?
Well, let me tell you what not to do. This is many, many years ago where while the it's a large compounding pharmacy, whereas the FDA and the state board walked in the front door. And so what the pharmacy did is had them go into a conference room, gave them some coffee, and then instructed the pharmacy techs to load up a bunch of compound drugs they shouldn't have had, and to take them out to the back alley and, and put them. I'm serious, and put them in the trunks of cars. What they didn't know is that there was a whistleblower who had already alerted the FBI, and the FBI had agents out in the alley with video cameras videoing all this.
Oh my
So
God.
after everything blew up, they came to me and said, "Can you get us out of this?" And basically, my response was, I'm good, but I'm not that good.
Yeah, no.
So that's what we, Sheila, that's what we don't do. So
Right.
Brad, now you can explain what you should do.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let's not do that. And so, in terms of, and I might call that trying to outsmart the FDA. And you don't want to try to do that. They've got plenty of resources. They got plenty of investigators out there, plenty of inspectors. So it's a great question because the FDA may call and say, "Hey, we'll be at your pharmacy on Monday. We'll be there for a couple of days." But in a lot of cases, they show up on Monday at 9 a.m. with a couple of inspectors, and they plan to be there for 2 or 3 days. So in that case, what we always tell pharmacies is you got to have a inspection leader. Other times they call it a response team, but it's got to be a couple of folks in the pharmacy, and you have to have a couple of backups trained so they know what to do when FDA shows up, so that it isn't off the rails. It all goes just fine. So you want your inspection leader and their right-hand person to be there, come out and greet the FDA. And this should all be part of a standard operating procedure for the pharmacy that people are trained on before FDA ever shows up. The inspection leader should greet the FDA, take them to the conference room, like Jeff said. Just don't take everything out the back door. Take them to the conference room, offer them coffee or Cokes. They will never take you up on that, but offer those things. And then, ask questions. The first thing you want to figure out is, well, why are you here today? And not in a real defensive way, but, why are you here today? And don't put the answer in their mouth. Let them explain. Well, we received a complaint from a competitor, or we have a patient complaint, or somebody got a bad prescription, or, a pharmacy benefit manager alerted us to something that was concerning to them. But if you can find out the context for why they're there, they're still going to but it kind of helps you, the pharmacy, to cut to the chase on what information do you want to provide them to kind of nip that in the bud, to put it to rest. Because it may very well be that there's not really a basis for them to even be there. They got some bad information. So in a very professional way, gather information. And then the second thing is, set some boundaries up, Sheila, where only certain people in the pharmacy are responding to FDA. So that's why you want your inspection leader and your right-hand person. And the right-hand person says, "Okay, you want these records, I'll go get those for you." And then they begin gathering them, or they involve somebody else, so that you're being responsive, but the FDA isn't just walking around the pharmacy interviewing everybody and talking to everybody, because they feel like the inspection leader and the right-hand person are getting them what they need in a very timely way. So set some boundaries as much as you can. Be sure, well, as much as you can, just set some boundaries, and then, remember what it is they're allowed to look at and what they can't look at. You should call your lawyer at the beginning, and don't expect your lawyer to bring the inspection to a halt, because that almost never happens, and it's not good to even try, in most cases, to even ask. But I think it's good to get a healthcare lawyer on the phone right away, and they can even meet the FDA inspectors by phone. I've done that dozens of times. I know Jeff has, other teammates of ours have done that. Just because you say, "Hey, we're here, we're glad to be responsive," and the lawyer can ask a few more questions too, which is kind of helpful. And then the main thing is to be responsive, give them what they're entitled to, but not things they're not. They shouldn't be asking about marketing materials. They shouldn't be going through files that are unrelated to the prescriptions you're filling, the product you're providing. It shouldn't be a deep dive into the business of the pharmacy, other than the prescriptions that the pharmacy is filling. And then cooperate, keep your lawyer on the hook, on the horn. And then, in the end, Sheila, and I know you've certainly talked to pharmacies about these, just like we have for for many years. We've all been in the industry for a while. And, when the inspection is done, the FDA is going to either issue a 483, which is kind of a report of deficiencies, or they're just going to say thank you and leave. But in a lot of cases, the very best pharmacies can still get a 483, which lists deficiencies. The most important thing the pharmacy can do is, don't sign that while they're there. That's way too fast. You want to take time to sleep on it, and typically have a couple of weeks of business days to respond to that. So then you want to get your healthcare lawyer involved for sure. And you want to go through and you want to prepare a written response to the 483, because these can be publicly filed by FDA. So I sure like my clients to have a robust response next to the 483 that's in the FDA file. And, respond if there wasn't a problem, explain why there wasn't a problem. If there was, explain why and how you've fixed the problem.
Yeah, and the FDA agent is not, he or she does not, in the back of his or her mind, knows that the pharmacy is probably not going to sign the 483. Pharmacies that do sign the 483 are the ones that have not been educated as to what or what not to do.
Right.
As Brad said, it's a notice of deficiencies, and we don't, as a pharmacy, at this juncture, we're not going to acknowledge anything. We're not going to acknowledge deficiencies. What we are going to say is, please hand us the 483 and we'll look at it. That's what the FDA agent expects. And so, and then as Brad said, let's be proactive and let's respond to it as quickly as we can, so we can at least try to get some control of the narrative.
Okay, so when they sign this 483, that is like acknowledging, like, yep, we see that, you found something and we're acknowledging, yep, that's what happened. Is that what that means?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're acknowledging that, and you're not providing a response,
Right.
which might be how we fixed it, putting it in context, but also more importantly, how we fixed it and how it's not going to be an issue going forward. You want to take a little bit of time, not during the heat of the moment, to provide all that information. That's why I think, you want to take your full 2 weeks, or at least take a week at least, and put together a really good, robust response to the 483. Because what you want to avoid, Sheila, is that it escalates to where they then issue a warning letter. Because once they issue a warning letter, then the risk there for pharmacies, besides the fact that it just looks bad in the industry, although a lot of good pharmacies get warning letters, but what looks bad about that is that a lot of industry partners then become aware of the warning letter, and then they may contact the pharmacy and go, we have some concerns about doing business with your pharmacy, about providing product to you. So it's really important to try to steer the FDA away from a warning letter. And the best way to do that is with a really good, robust response, a helpful response to the 483.
But what if we're not able to steer them away? And what do we do if the pharmacy does get a warning letter? How do they respond to that?
Yeah, then with a lot of detail, either explaining, usually these allegations are all kind of broken down by incident, or by breach, by violation. So you want to address all those in great detail and put them in context, and explain them away as much as you can. But where you can't, certainly you got to explain what you've done to change your policies to ensure that isn't going to be an issue going forward. Some I've worked on, for example, and Jeff has worked on, it might be that what you had was an untrained employee who handled a certain situation, and unfortunately they mishandled it. So there have been cases where we drop dime, we don't name them, but we drop dime on, okay, this was under the watchful eye of employee blah, 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 or whatever. Here's the situation. And what happened was that we hadn't trained him on this particular, protocol in a satisfactory manner. And as a result, this is how he responded, which is why there was this violation. What we've done now is we've retrained our workforce with the following SOPs, and you walk them through why that's never going to be an issue again. While you put it in context of, you don't say these words, but it really isn't as bad as you, FDA, are making it sound. That's helpful. That's super helpful to minimize it and then to resolve it. And that way, if your industry partners become aware of it and they see the response, in a lot of cases, they, frankly, they empathize with the farmers. I'm sorry you had to go through all that. It was a lot of trouble for what wasn't that big of a deal. in most cases.
So now let's talk about boards of pharmacy. What type of relationships should the specialty pharmacy have with state boards of pharmacy?
Sure. Now, I'll take the lead on that. At the end of the day, Brad and I are attorneys. And so it is extreme. And Brad's licensed in multiple states. I'm licensed in Texas. And so let's just use Texas as an example. It is critical, and our law we can practice. We practice law because we have a law license issued by the state bar. Well, if the state bar doesn't like us, if the state bar thinks that Brad and I are incompetent or dishonest or something and yanks our license, then all of a sudden we can't practice law anymore. And so it's critical that as attorneys that we maintain an excellent relationship with the bar of the state in which we have our license. Well, the same thing applies to a pharmacy. It's the Board of Pharmacy that issues the license to the pharmacy, and if the Board of Pharmacy yanks that license, well, then the pharmacy is no longer a pharmacy. It's nothing, and so it's critical that at the end of the day, the Board of Pharmacy has primary jurisdiction over the pharmacy. Sure, the FDA can assert some jurisdiction depending on the circumstances. The DEA can assert some jurisdiction depending on the circumstances. But the primary jurisdictional body is the Board of Pharmacy. And so it's critical that we maintain a good relationship. Even if we think, for example, that the Board of Pharmacy is being heavy-handed, we think it's coming down on us for something that we didn't think we did, even if we disagree with the Board of Pharmacy. We treat the Board of Pharmacy essentially the same way that we're going to treat PBMs, and that is win-win. Okay, well, there's obviously a problem because the Board of Pharmacy thinks that we've mishandled something, that we've done something wrong. Even if we disagree, even if we think the facts are on our side, nevertheless, possession is 9/10 of the law. The Board of Pharmacy possesses the pharmacy's license, and so we've got to solve the problem in a win-win sort of way. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is do at all costs we maintain a good relationship with the Board of Pharmacy. Brad, your thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's helpful if you can have, and this requires certainly some effort on the pharmacy's part to cultivate these relationships. If you got, if you're licensed in 50 states,
right?
You want to have contacts at as many state boards of pharmacy, well, all of them, frankly, but at least as many as possible where you do a significant amount of business. Because if there's an issue, I love it when the Board of Pharmacy gives one of my clients a heads up. Hey, we have an issue here in Virginia. We have an issue here in Texas. It isn't formal discipline. It's an issue that's come up. We'd like to get a response to this. And to have that kind of a good relationship with the board where somebody's going to give you a heads up, and it happens a lot, that's really helpful, at least at a minimum, to have a contact in every state. So if a problem does arise, you've got somebody there who can either vouch for you or at least knows that you're in good standing in the state, and that this is just a blip on the screen, just an issue to address. So to Jeff's point, relationships are everything. At a minimum, know the executive director and the team there, at least know who they are, have somebody in your team that has a good updated contact list. So if a problem comes up, we can reach out to that state proactively, either on our own or through legal counsel, but right away and nip the problem in the bud.
Sure. So I think we started off talking about, the value of a compliance program, right? Like why you need one. And I think we've kind of talked about some issues here that can be a little bit daunting. So assuming that a small specialty pharmacy wants a compliance program and specifically wants a compliance officer, but they can't afford a full-time compliance officer, what should the pharmacy do?
Well, and I'll tackle this one. We do the best we can. Okay. It's, so if we're a small pharmacy and cannot afford a full-time compliance officer, then let's assign compliance duties to a key employee who we trust. It might be head of HR, it might be maybe head of IT. It might be just one of our staff pharmacists, but somebody that we know and trust. and we say, listen, we know that you now are going to wear two hats. You're going to be our compliance officer, and you're going to be something else. We want you to, we're going to help train you as a compliance officer. We're going to put together a written corporate compliance plan that you need to read and understand. Here is the telephone number of our healthcare attorney for you to reach out to when necessary. And even though you are wearing 2 or 3 hats here at the pharmacy, we want you to really focus on compliance issues. And that is so much better than doing nothing. And then, of course, if the pharmacy grows, then it's a different story. Maybe we can have a full-time compliance officer. But even small pharmacies can have a compliance officer who is the proverbial canary in the mine shaft.
Totally agree. And one thing I might add to that, Sheila and Jeff, is it's helpful for the pharmacy to maintain a training file for that corporate compliance officer, even if it's a part-time job, as Jeff says, somebody else wears 2 hats. Keep a contemporaneous file with all the compliance training they receive, all the webinars they watch online or listen to online, all the publications they're reading. If they go to training in person, keep all that in the file. If you ever do find yourself having to answer for, why is Sheila your compliance officer? Okay, she wears 2 hats, but what is her training on compliance? We can pull out the file. It's going to be electronic, but we can pull out the file and demonstrate to whoever's asking, hey, Sheila's been through all this training and it's annual, and she's done all these webinars and attended all these seminars. That's very helpful to alleviate any concerns that a pharmacy doesn't have a full-time compliance officer.
All right, Jeff, Brad, any closing thoughts?
As always, we've been talking to you folks for about an hour. All I can say is that stay close to NASP. NASP is a great resource. And by being an active member of NASP and serving on its various committees, then as a pharmacy, we're really going to grow and be successful. Understand that all of us are stakeholders. We're in this together. A rising tide lifts all boats. And so, it's just so important that we all be active members of NASP. Brad?
Totally agree. And Sheila, thank you so much for having us. It's a pleasure to speak to NASP members, and we appreciate you inviting us today.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And I can tell you, every time I talk to, prospective members and I tell them about amazing organizations such as, Brown and Fortunato and the two of you, and that you're members of NASP and supporting the industry, they always take a step back. They're like, really? I'm like, yeah, but it's awesome, right? And I'm like, just the tools, the benefits, the resources, right? The webinars, these podcasts, everything that you provide for members to try to help them, right? Because, pharmacy, unfortunately, it's a tough place.
It's a tough place. That's right. And it's a tough place. It's complicated. It's so much of it is a gray area, Sheila. We're all making decisions the best way we can. We do our best. Sometimes we stumble, but we're in this together. And as long as we're in this together, then good things happen.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you both so much for chatting with me and sharing all of this valuable information.
Glad to do it. You guys take care. Bye-bye.
As a reminder, NASP corporate members are invited to be my guest on one complimentary podcast per year. For more information about this or other NASP membership benefits, please feel free to reach out to membership@naspnet.org or visit our website, www.naspnet.org. Until next time, have a great day.